Time and time again, the polls have failed us. We all remember President Hillary Clinton, right? No? What about President Dewey? Huh. Again, no. So, why do we listen to the polls? Why do we continue to deceive ourselves? And why do we use a system that we know is inaccurate? Well, I don't know the answer to that. However, I do know the solution, which is what I can provide. A fact-based election prediction that is not based on the polls whatsoever. And I guarantee you, the result will surprise you. I'll start this prediction just like I'd start any other, with the safe states. And for lack of a better term, the outcome of the safe states is pretty much predetermined. And that's because the safe states are the states that I view will vote for a 10% or higher margin for the predicted candidate. And you're not going to see the results of these states be different than the prediction unless an extreme circumstance occurs. For the Democratic Party, the safe states are Washington, Oregon, California, Hawaii, Colorado, New Mexico, Illinois, New York, Vermont, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, the District of Columbia, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Maine's at large, as well as Maine's 1st, and Virginia. As for the Republican Party, the safe states are Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Utah, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska at large, Nebraska's 1st, Nebraska's 3rd, Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, West Virginia, and South Carolina. Some inclusions or omissions of safe states are a bit controversial here, so I'm going to explain myself. So for Utah, even though Evan McMullin put up a pretty good showing in 2016, garnering about 20% of the vote, he still lost to Donald Trump by that 10% margin, so even if he does run in 2024, it will vote safely to the Republican Party. And for Montana and West Virginia, even though they both have one Democratic senator, with that being Jon Tester in Montana and Joe Manchin in West Virginia, they vote overwhelmingly Republican in presidential elections. And even if Joe Manchin has a third party run, West Virginia will still vote for Donald Trump by that greater than 10% margin. As for the Democratic Party, some people may be considering why I believe Colorado, New Mexico, and Virginia to be safely Democratic states. And here's why I believe that's the case. First of all, I'm not looking at the polls, which are concerning for Biden in Colorado and Virginia especially. I'm looking at trends, and the trend is that these three states are no longer the swing states that they once were. They're now safely Democratic states, and here's what makes me believe that. In all three states, they have two Democratic senators, and the election of senators more closely aligns with presidential election results than the election of governors. And the main reason people believe Virginia to be not a safely Democratic state is due to their election of Glenn Youngkin, who is their governor. However, in Virginia's state legislature positions, both houses are ruled by the Democratic Party, with majority of the legislators being Democratic members. So therefore, Virginia will vote safely Democratic in 2024, just like it did in 2020. And so will Colorado and New Mexico, who both have booming cities, in Colorado being Denver, and New Mexico being Albuquerque and Santa Fe. With these cities comes Democratic voters, which will cause these states to be safely Democratic states. And some omissions for safe states are Iowa, Minnesota, Ohio, Maine's 2nd district, as well as Nebraska's 2nd district. However, even though I omitted these states and districts from the safe state category, I do believe they're more than leaning towards one party or the other. In the case of Minnesota, Minnesota is likely voting for the Democratic Party. Minnesota voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016 as well as Biden in 2020, and I don't see anything different happening in 2024. As for Ohio and Iowa, Ohio and Iowa have become Republican strongholds, with Iowa having a Republican governor, Kim Reynolds, as well as two Republican senators, and Ohio having elected J.D. Vance in 2022, Republican Governor Mike DeWine, and electing Trump in 2020 by a vast margin. Neither Iowa or Ohio can be classified as safe states, but they will be voting for Donald Trump in this election. Maine's 2nd district will vote for Donald Trump, whereas Nebraska's 2nd district will vote for Joe Biden. Nebraska's 2nd is mainly a city, and Maine's 2nd district is mostly rural communities, which is why Maine's 2nd is voting for Trump and Nebraska's 2nd is voting for Biden. In the case of Alaska, Even though Alaska did vote for Mary Peltola in the at-large congressional district in 2022, Alaska does vote for the Republican candidate in presidential elections, which is what you'll see in this election. But it's not going to safely vote for Donald Trump, but it will vote for Donald Trump between that 5 and 10% margin that makes it lean more towards the Republican Party, but not safely Republican. So at this point in the race, we have Democrats at 222 votes and Republicans at 149. I'd also like to give New Hampshire to the Democratic Party. And that's because New Hampshire, even though they did have a scare, so to speak, for their Democratic bastion, as some people call it, with the 2022 Senate race, the Republican Party will not win New Hampshire in a presidential election. In fact, the Republican Party didn't win New Hampshire in the Senate race either. And New Hampshire voted for about 8% for Joe Biden in 2020 and will therefore vote for Joe Biden in 2024 by a similar margin. As Trump, even though he won New Hampshire by a wide margin in the primary, he will not win New Hampshire in the general election due to past trends that we've seen with the state. So now we're entering what I view to be actual swing states. So the states that I view can actually flip from one party or the other, with Texas being a slight exception, but I'll need to explain that state in more depth in a bit. But these states will have a chance to actually flip and aren't going to be considered safe or lean states by either party. With the electoral count at 226 for Joe Biden and 149 for Donald Trump, it's clear that Trump needs to win some of these swing states in order to even stand a chance at winning this election. Luckily for him, I view that the 40 electoral votes from Texas will go to Donald Trump. Now, I know some of you may be confused at me viewing Texas as a swing state in the first place, but I'll explain my reasons. So I view that there's been what's called the Beto Revolution in Texas. And this is that candidate Beto O'Rourke for the senatorship, as well as the governorship, challenging Ted Cruz and Greg Abbott respectively, has put up a good fight for the Democrats and has galvanized Democratic support in Texas. He also ran for the presidency in the 2020 U.S. presidential election, but he fell flat, losing to Joe Biden. In any case, his impact on Texas has been seen with him tightening the races in the senatorship and governorship, and his campaigning for Joe Biden being seen as a crucial reason that Texas was seen as a swing state in the 2020 presidential election too. So with all that being said, I view that Texas will still go to Donald Trump due to Texas having two Republican senators, Greg Abbott, and historically going to the Republican Party, but Texas cannot be counted out as a swing state due to what's called the Beto Revolution. The next state that I'm covering is Florida. So for some backstory, Florida has voted for Donald Trump both in 2016 and 2020, as well as DeSantis in 2022 and Senator Rubio in 2022. With that being said, Florida has been trending towards the Republican Party ever since it voted for George Bush in the 2000 presidential election. Florida is also Trump's home state and the home state of potential VP picks, Rubio and Donalds. If Trump picks Rubio or Donalds as his VP, one of the three of them, whoever he picks as his VP, or Trump, will have to move from Florida according to the 12th Amendment. But that's besides the point. What the point is that Florida is seen as an extremely important and crucial state to this election cycle, as exemplified by Trump even living in there. And the reason Florida is so important, besides its 30 electoral votes, is that it's the home of a population that has been trending towards the Republican Party. In fact, it's a minority population, which isn't usually seen as trending towards the Republican Party. But in Florida, it's seen that the Latin American vote has been trending towards Donald Trump, especially in Florida, as there have been many Cuban immigrants to the state. And with Trump securing that crucial population, it's possible that Trump will win Florida in 2024. And I view that it's likely, in fact, that Trump will win Florida in 2024. The next state that we have is the state of North Carolina. North Carolina, again, voted for Trump in both 2016 and 2020, but North Carolina is seemingly narrowing up due to a multitude of factors. But the main factor is the candidate from North Carolina running for governor, namely Mark Robinson. Robinson is a dangerous candidate for governor according to many moderate voters, and he will attract Democratic voters because he denies that the Holocaust even happened, and he's extremely transphobic as well as homophobic, and moderate voters don't see this too kindly. Due to his radical views, it's apparent that North Carolina may narrow up, but I still believe due to past trends that North Carolina will vote Republican in the 2024 U.S. presidential election. With North Carolina, the Republicans are now leading 235 to 226. And now we have the state of Georgia. So Georgia is still a member of the Republican-dominated Bible Belt, otherwise known as the Deep South, with Republican Governor Brian Kemp, despite two Democratic senators, Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock. The 2020 election, though it did go to Joe Biden, was decided by very few votes, so it's not too indicative of how Georgia will go in 2024. Additionally, back in the 2022 Senate race in Georgia, Herschel Walker ran, a former football star, as a part of the Georgia Bulldogs, and he lost by an extremely close margin, even though he had an abundance of mental health issues and allegations of domestic violence. Republicans swept all other state offices during this time and ultimately had an extremely good showing despite losing the Senate race. So therefore, due to there not being a Senate candidate that's widely unpopular in this cycle around in Georgia, as there's no Senate race, I view that Donald Trump will win in Georgia because Georgia is still a member of that Republican-dominated Deep South, and due to past trends, it seems as if Trump will win the state once again in 2024, going off of his 2016 win. So now that we've reached a turning point in this election prediction, with the Republican Party up 251 to the Democratic Party's 226, I think it's important to remark upon the impact that RFK Jr. will have on this election. So with the name of Kennedy, it's vital to note that he will probably take votes from the Democratic Party, but also some of his policies actually align with the Republican Party, and therefore he will take votes from the Republican Party. So he's seemingly going to take similar amounts of votes from both parties and will therefore have a minimal effect on this election, no matter how many votes he ends up getting. So for example, if he gets 20% of the popular vote and 10% is from Republicans and 10% is from Democrats, well, he's hardly had an impact on the election as he hasn't played a spoiler to any of the candidates. So ultimately, I view that RFK Jr. will not have much of an impact on this election, and it'll mostly be a rematch of Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and nobody will really pay attention to RFK Jr.'s third-party campaign. So now we head to the state of Arizona. It's important to remark that the state of Arizona had a sort of mini presidential election in 2022 where they had Biden-backed candidate Katie Hobbs run against Trump-backed candidate Kari Lake. And ultimately, the Biden-backed candidate Katie Hobbs won the gubernatorial election. Additionally, in Arizona, according to ABC News, there's been more unaffiliated voters. And unaffiliated voters typically align with Biden. And ultimately, Phoenix is one of the fastest growing U.S. cities. And with fast growing cities comes fast growing Democratic voter base. And therefore, for those reasons, Arizona will go to Democratic candidate Joe Biden in 2024. Next, we have the state of Nevada. In the 2020 presidential election, Biden won Nevada by a little over 2% of the vote, and this was largely attributed to the rise of Latino voters in Nevada. The Latino voters in Nevada typically vote for the Democratic candidates, such as Biden, and ultimately, I view that Nevada will stay with the Democratic Party. Moreover, Nevada in its Senate elections has typically voted for the Democratic Party, having 2 Democratic senators. Even though Nevada does have Republican Governor Joe Lombardo, Senate races are typically more indicative of presidential elections than governor races. And ultimately, given this data, I view that Nevada will go to Joe Biden in 2024. Finally, we have the remainder of the Rust Belt with the states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. So what's been widely talked about is the amount of Muslim voters in these states, particularly Michigan. And these voters disapprove of Biden's policies, particularly of his policies in Gaza, relating to the United States' alliance and maintenance of that alliance with Israel. Biden has seen a poor primary performance compared to what was expected of him in these states, ultimately having uncommitted voters showing up in droves and over 100,000 votes in Michigan being uncommitted for this reason. For this purpose, some people view that these states might flip to Donald Trump. However, I view that these voters will dislike Donald Trump more than they dislike Joe Biden and will therefore still vote for Biden regardless. Because again, most of these voters voted in the Democratic primary and will ultimately vote for the Democratic candidate. A lot of people view this election as a lesser of two evils principle, so they may view Biden's policies as evil, but Trump's policies as more evil, and ultimately choose to vote for Biden for this reason, even though they disagree with Biden's policies in Israel. And in the end, Biden may actually compromise with these voters in order to gain their votes, but that still has to be seen. The trends in these states, too, have proven that Biden will likely win all three of them, with Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania having favorable outcomes for Democratic candidates. The only state that voted for a Republican candidate out of these three states is Wisconsin, voting for Ron Johnson in the Senate race. However, Johnson is a seasoned senator, he knows how to run his elections, and ultimately he knows how to appeal to Wisconsin's base. And even with all these factors in play, he still almost lost the Senate race. So, given that in mind, given the popular governors of Gretchen Whitmer and Josh Shapiro in Michigan, Pennsylvania respectively, these three states will go to the Democratic Party, and ultimately the election will flip for this purpose, with Biden winning 287 to 251, and Biden will win the election in 2024. So I've noticed a lot of people making predictions view that Trump will win this election. However, I view that these predictions are wrong. But if you agree with other predictions and you disagree with my analysis, that's okay. Just write your opinions in the comments and explain why you think my prediction is wrong. In the end, I just want to make the most accurate prediction that I can, and I'm glad you watched this video. So make sure to like and subscribe if you appreciated this video and thought my commentary was good, and I just appreciate the fact that you watched this video, so thank you.